Averages are useful for studying the past, but they don't always tell you the whole story. If you have your feet in the freezer and your head in the oven, on average you're okay. But are you really? Hi, I'm Maxime Dubé, Portfolio Manager at Claret, and in this video I explain why you should not necessarily rely on historical averages when investing for your retirement, and I'll give you some tips and planning methods to have a better chance of reaching your retirement goals. When you aim for the average, you only get there half the time. That's the main problem with performance averages for retirement planning. For example, we know that the S&P 500 has produced a return of 10% per year for the past 100 years, on average. But the returns have not been consistent. From 1990 to 1999, the S&P 500 produced an excellent return of 18.6% per year, while from 1965 to 1974, the annual return of the index was 0%. Obviously, if you had retired before either of these two periods, you would have had two very different scenarios for your portfolio. The other problem with historical averages is that most financial planning models put the long-term future inflation assumption at 2%. As mentioned in a previous video, it is true that observed inflation in recent years has hovered around 2%, but that has not always been the case. I could make a prediction about what might happen over the next 10, 20, or 30 years. But is it really worth it? I believe that a better way to prepare is to analyze what would have happened to a retiree's portfolio if he had retired just before the worst periods in history, instead of making predictions based on what the market has done on average in the past. So, let's take the example of an individual who is 65 years old and intends to live off his savings for 30 years until he's 95. We looked at each 30-year period since 1925, so from 1925 to 1955, from 1926 to 1956, and so on. The individual had an initial portfolio of $1 million and planned to make an initial withdrawal of 4%, so $40,000. Then, we indexed that amount each year to the cost of living with historical inflation data. We did the simulation for a balanced portfolio, 50% in stocks and 50% in fixed income securities. If you had retired in 1981, 1982, or 1984, at the end of 30 years, the value of your portfolio would have been 18 million, 14 million, and 16 million respectively, including all withdrawals, which are the three best possible 30-year scenarios. On the other hand, there are two scenarios where you would have run out of money in 1964 and 1965. You would have exhausted your capital at the end of 27 and 25 years respectively. Even if the returns were reasonable during these two 30-year periods, since the withdrawals are indexed to the cost of living, it is mainly because of the high inflation during the 1970s that the portfolio empties before 30 years. As a reminder, the average inflation during the 1970s was 7.4%. In the two worst-case scenarios, 1964 and 1965, increasing the equity portion to 75% would have allowed the portfolio to pass through the 30-year period. There are $26,000 left at the end of the 30-year period for 1965 and $777,000 for 1964. If we increase to 100% equity, the results are even better. Indeed, stocks tend to perform better over the long term and help the portfolio maintain its purchasing power when inflation is high, unlike bonds. That being said, if we redo the simulation with a 100% income portfolio, 50% of the time the individual outlives his portfolio. Even in retirement, having a portfolio invested 100% in stocks seems like the best option, especially in a high inflation environment. But having more stocks also means more fluctuations, and in retirement, it can be harder to handle the same level of stress. Each individual should find the balance between maximizing returns and minimizing sleepless nights. According to our study, you should have at least 50% invested in stocks at retirement or decrease the size of your withdrawals as a percentage of your portfolio. Otherwise, the risk that you empty your portfolio increases. And finally, the maximum initial withdrawal as a percentage of your portfolio is the most important data to consider. Note that if you have $1 million and decide to spend $100,000 per year, we hope that luck is with you, because there's a limit to what your portfolio manager can do. For more investment tips, visit our website at claret.ca and don't forget to click on the subscribe button.